Is about financial failure in early modern England. And I suppose in its simplest sense, financial failure occurred when an individual was unable to repay a debt within a designated period. But during this period, failure has many sort of connotations and many different meanings. And because an individual had failed to repay a debt, they were seen to be immoral. And really what the book is about these multifaceted meanings of failure. So they failed not just in an economic sense, but perhaps also in a sort of religious sense, in a moral sense. And as you work through the book, what you find is it's not just the bankrupt who have failed, but it's also members of their family, members of the local community, their trading partners, and also this idea that the legal systems in place also failed to come to a comprehensive understanding of what was really going on. So the whole book is really about these sort of multifaceted and multidimensional meanings of failure that occur in 17th and 18th century England. So the entire book looks at cases involving bankruptcy that were litigated in the Court of Chancery between 1674 and 1750. So Chancery is a court of equity that dealt in civil disputes. And what I was really interested in with bankruptcy is it's a sort of extreme measure of how credit worked or was intended to work. So what we see with bankruptcy cases is this idea that it's completely failed, it's come to a complete and utter breakdown. And I suppose the point being that when systems break down, we can often learn the most about that system or the most about the nature of that system by showing how it was intended to work and how it came so sort of catastrophically wrong. So by reconstructing these ideas of bankruptcy and bankruptcy cases, we can see how a credit-based economy was intended to work in early modern England and why people were so outraged and came to sort of litigate these ideas in the court. All of the records of the Court of Chancery are held at the National Archives in Kew in London. So the book is really quite an extensive archival endeavour. The book looks at over 300 cases of bankruptcy, litigated at different stages of the proceedings. So whilst all the records of the court in early modern England were recorded in written form, the subsequent sort of filing and cataloguing and digitisation of these records has really been done to differing standards and creates a lot of complexities. So what I decided to do was to analyse each stage of proceeding in isolation, and that roughly forms the basis of the chapter structure. So the first few chapters look at the initiation of cases, so the pleadings, which are the bills of complaint and their subsequent answers. Then it moves on to the sort of evidentiary stage, which are depositions, where both parties had a chance to ask and answer questions of witnesses. And then the final chapter looks at the decision-making processes of the court, so what the Lord Chancellor decided and how he came to those decisions based upon the principles of conscience and equity and fairness. I suppose that one area that really stood out and I think was quite interesting is this link of bankruptcy to the history of emotions and emotional sort of depreciation. So we might think of financial failure just in and of itself as something that's quite a financial business hardship. What you see throughout the book is this link to the sort of emotional and psychological downfall of a bankrupt. So you have, in a depositions chapter, you have a lot of witnesses come forward to give their personal accounts of how an individual had gone from quite a respectable and well understood business person within the community to being sort of working their way down to a bankrupt. And many of them are described as crying, as in a state of undress, as melancholy, as really being at the sort of bottom of their psychological, emotional, financial health. So you see links throughout the book from not just people being downtrodden in an economic sense, but linking to much more broader conceptions of emotions, of psychology, of family welfare. So this link that it goes to other areas within society. Well, I think one of the interesting aspects of bankruptcy is during this period in 1706, really sets the tone for future bankruptcy laws. So in 1706 it became a capital offence to be a bankrupt. So in theory, you could be hanged if you concealed your assets. But it also began this process of relieving a bankrupt from future endeavours so that you could start again as an entrepreneur in the economy. And that's led on to people like Donald Trump being bankrupt around 4 times, and it hasn't really affected his personal wealth or status. This really is the essence of when this started, was in early modern England. So it's interesting and important to look back and see the developments of bankruptcy law during this period. And this desire to punish bankrupts still remains with us today. But there's also this desire to allow entrepreneurial spirit and allow people to recover from their failures and their past mistakes. I hope, first and foremost, that they find it interesting, or at least parts of it interesting. I think the main point to take away is that these are complicated affairs. Failure is in itself multifaceted, it has multiple meanings, and perhaps we can draw some parallels to the modern day and learn some lessons from the past. And I would encourage people to think about financial issues and the way that money works, the way that the banking system works, the way that the laws regulate these affairs, and the way in which sort of private individuals are pursued for their debts, and how some debts are considered sort of good, like mortgages and credit cards, and some debts are considered bad, like what we see with healthcare in America, and perhaps being indebted to the state. And just to really question and to continue to think about the way in which money works and the banking system works in this country and across the sort of Western world.